There are men who spend decades building toward a single moment, a number, a date, a version of freedom they can finally put their hands on. Oswald Pemberton had that number. He had that date. He had planned every dollar of it with the kind of precision that only a man who has spent 30 years in technology can manage. $510,000, liquid, ready, waiting for his 60th birthday like a reward he had earned with his own life. He never got to spend it. Before he turned 60, before the party his sister had already started planning, before the retirement announcement email he had drafted and saved in his outbox, it was gone, every dollar of it. And the woman who took it was sitting in a Manila office building, managing a team of 12 people, wearing the watch he had bought her, answering emails on the laptop he had paid for. This is his story, in his words. The night I wired the last of it, I was sitting in my hotel room in Makati with a glass of room temperature water and a laptop screen that felt like it was judging me. I had been in the Philippines for 4 months by then. I knew the city well enough to find my way around without Google Maps. I knew which jeepneys to take and which ones to avoid. I knew the restaurants Zara liked and the ones she said were beneath her. I knew almost everything about her life, and I knew almost nothing true about it. The transfer confirmation appeared on my screen at 11:47 in the evening. $212,000 into an account, she said, was for the new condo she was purchasing. An investment, she called it. Something we would both benefit from one day. I remember staring at that confirmation number. I remember thinking that I should feel something, fear, relief, love, anything. But I just felt tired. I felt like a man who had been running a race he did not remember entering. I need to take you back to the beginning, because none of it makes sense from that hotel room. It only makes sense from where I started. My name is Oswald Pemberton. I go by Oz, have since college, because nobody calls a kid Oswald without consequences. I spent 31 years in technology. Started as a network engineer in the 90s, moved into executive roles by my early 40s, ended up as a VP of infrastructure at a mid-sized software company in Seattle. Good work, honest work. The kind of work that pays well if you are patient and do not make too many expensive mistakes. I made one very expensive mistake, but that comes later. I was 58 years old when I started seriously planning my exit. I had been thinking about it for years, the retirement, the freedom, the version of my life that was not defined by quarterly targets and organizational restructuring. I had no wife. I had never married. I had come close once, in my late 30s, with a woman named Patricia who was brilliant and impatient and decided Seattle winters were not for her. She moved to Austin. We stayed friendly. But there had been nobody serious after Patricia, and by the time I was deep into my 50s, I had stopped expecting that to change. What I had instead was a plan, a very detailed, very specific plan. By the time I turned 60, I would have $510,000 in liquid savings, that figure on top of my 401k, which I would not touch until required. The liquid savings would fund the first 5 years of travel and slow living. I had researched Southeast Asia extensively, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines. Cost of living, healthcare access, expat community strength, visa options. I had spreadsheets. I had backup spreadsheets. I had a folder on my laptop called Year 1 with estimated monthly budgets for 3 different countries. I was the kind of person who had a plan for his plan. My colleague at the company, a man named Theo who was about my age and had done 2 years in Singapore, used to say I was the most organized, lonely person he had ever met. He said it like a joke. It landed like something else. I was lonely. I knew I was lonely. I had good friends, good habits, a clean apartment with a view of the water that I genuinely loved. But there is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from having built a careful, successful, solitary life, the kind where everything works and nothing breathes. I wanted something that breathed. I just did not know how to find it inside a life I had already designed to run without it. I went to the Philippines in January, not to retire, not yet. I was 9 months from my 60th birthday. I went for 3 weeks, partly as a scouting trip, partly because Theo had told me Manila was worth seeing before I made any decisions about where to land. I met Zara Santos on the 8th day. It was not a bar, not a resort. It was a hotel lobby breakfast, the kind of unremarkable morning situation where you are reading something on your phone and someone asks if the chair beside you is taken. She worked nearby, a management role at a logistics firm in the BGC district, something about regional operations. She was 34 years old. She was dressed like someone who took her career seriously. She had a direct way of speaking that I was not expecting, and that I found immediately refreshing. We talked for 40 minutes over bad hotel coffee. She gave me her card. I gave her mine. I did not think about it much after she left. She messaged me that evening. A recommendation for a restaurant near my hotel. Somewhere she said the food was actually good, unlike most tourist spots. Nothing suggestive, just practical and warm. We had dinner 2 nights later, then lunch the day after. By the end of my 3rd week, I had extended my stay by 10 days, which I told myself was for research purposes, and which had nothing to do with research. Zara was not what I had imagined when I thought about meeting someone in Southeast Asia. I want to be honest about that. I had my own assumptions going in. She did not fit them. She had a degree in business administration from a university in Manila that I later looked up and confirmed was well regarded. She had been at her company for 6 years. She lived alone in a small apartment in Pasig. Modest, practical, nothing that signaled anything other than a working professional living within her means. She talked about her career ambitions with a focus that reminded me of myself at 30. She asked me about technology and actually engaged with the answers. She did not seem interested in what I had. She seemed interested in me. That distinction matters, because it was the distinction I relied on when everything else started to feel uncertain. I would go back to that first impression, the career, the independence, the directness, and I would tell myself that a woman like that did not need my money, that she had her own path, that what was happening between us was not what happened to other men in other stories I had read about on expat forums before I came. I was right that she did not need my money. What I misunderstood was how well she understood its value. I went back to Seattle in February. I had a job to finish. My resignation was planned for April, to give the company enough transition time and to protect my final year bonus. Zara and I stayed in contact, daily messages, video calls 3 or 4 times a week. She would call me from her office during lunch. I could see the desk behind her, the computer, the calendar on the wall. It felt real. It looked real. In March, she told me her company was restructuring. Her position was being evaluated. She was not panicking. She was matter-of-fact about it. But she mentioned that if she lost the role, her apartment lease would become a problem. She was not asking for anything. She mentioned it the way you mention something to a person you trust, in the middle of a larger conversation about something else. I offered to help. She said no. I offered again. She said, Oz, I am not calling you to ask for money. I am calling you because I like talking to you. I sent her $2,000 anyway. She thanked me quietly and said she would pay it back. I told her not to worry about it. That was the first transfer, March 14th. I remember the date because it was the same week I submitted my resignation letter. I want to be careful here about how I describe what followed, because it was not a flood. It was not a sudden demand. It was more like a very slow leak in a very large container, the kind you don't notice until you reach in and find it shallower than it should be. April, I resigned. My final day was April 30th. My colleagues threw me a small party. Theo gave a speech. My boss, a man named Craig, who I had never fully liked but respected professionally, shook my hand and said I had built something at that company that would last. I drove home that evening feeling something I had not felt in years, the physical lightness of being completely unscheduled. No Monday deliverables, no Sunday anxiety, just time stretching out ahead of me, mine to fill. I booked my return flight to Manila for June. 6 weeks to close out my Seattle life, pack what mattered, put the apartment in Belltown up for a short-term rental. Zara was excited. She had sent me photos of neighborhoods she thought I might like. She had research on expat communities, healthcare facilities, good co-working spaces for when I wanted to keep my mind active. She had put work into it, into us. May brought 3 more transfers. Her restructuring had gone badly. She had kept her position but at a reduced salary while the company reorganized. Her laptop had died. Her mother in Pampanga needed dental surgery that cost more than her monthly take-home. A cousin who had been sharing rent with her had moved out suddenly, leaving her short for the month. Each one was separate. Each one had a specific, reasonable explanation. Each one was an amount I could absorb without feeling it. Together they were $19,000 before I even landed in Manila. I want to say I noticed. I want to say some part of me was tracking it. But I had just left a 30-year career. My apartment was in someone else's hands, and I was 59 years old and genuinely happy for what felt like the first time in a decade. Happiness has a way of narrowing your attention. It focuses you on the thing that is making you feel good and softens the edges of everything else. I landed in Manila on a Tuesday in June. Zara met me at arrivals. She was in a blue dress, and she looked like everything I had been looking forward to for 3 months. And when she hugged me, she said quietly, "I am so glad you came back," in a way that did not sound like performance. We spent the first 2 weeks in a kind of rhythm that felt like the retirement I had planned. Morning coffee at a place near Bonifacio Global City, long afternoons, dinners that went until 10, conversations that ran long and easy. I rented a furnished apartment in a good building in Makati, 22,000 pesos a month, which was almost insultingly cheap by Seattle standards. I paid for it happily. She stayed over most nights. Not officially living with me, she kept her Pasig apartment, but present enough that the space took on her shape. A few of her things on the bathroom shelf, a jacket behind the door, the specific brand of instant coffee she liked in the kitchen cabinet. It felt like a life, a real warm, uncomplicated life. The first real warning sign came in July, and I noticed it and dismissed it within about 90 seconds, which I think about often now. I had borrowed her phone briefly. Mine was charging in the other room, to check something. A message came through while I was holding it. I did not read it deliberately. It was just there on the locked screen. A name I did not recognize, a message in Tagalog that had a tone I could not read precisely, but that felt informal and affectionate in a way that made me pause. She came back into the room. I handed her the phone without saying anything. She looked at the screen, looked at me, and said, "My cousin. He is always messaging at weird times." She put the phone face down on the table and changed the subject. That is all it was, a notification, a name. A 2-second pause that I let go of, because I did not want to be the jealous man, the suspicious foreigner, the person who ruined something good over a text message he did not even read. I let it go completely. I did not bring it up again. In August, the amounts changed. Up until then, the requests had been in the low thousands, amounts that stung if I counted them, but that I could rationalize individually. In August, she came to me with something different. Her company, she said, was offering early retirement packages to managers who agreed to waive future claims. She had been approached. She wanted to take it, to step away, to have freedom like mine, to finally build something on her own terms. But the package required her to sign papers quickly, and if she did that, she would be without income for at least 4 months while she figured out her next move. She needed a bridge, not charity, a loan. She was very specific about that. A loan, documented, with a repayment schedule she had already thought out. She showed me a piece of paper with numbers on it, monthly repayment amounts, a projected timeline. She had done the math, $50,000. I sat with it for 3 days. I asked her questions. I asked about the company, about the package terms, about her plans. She answered everything clearly. She was calm. She was not pleading or performing. She made it sound like a reasonable business conversation between two adults. I transferred the $50,000 on a Thursday afternoon. She thanked me. She did not cry. She said, "I am going to make this right, Oz. I want you to know that." I believed her. I believed her specifically because she did not cry. My sister Ellen called from Portland the following week. Ellen was 62, practical, no nonsense, the kind of woman who reads the fine print on everything. She had known about Zara since May. I had told her in the general terms of someone sharing good news, but she had been politely cautious rather than enthusiastic. During that call, she asked me directly, "How much have you spent on her, Oz? Total?" "All of it." I gave her a number that was honest but not complete. I left out the 50,000. I left it out because I knew how it would sound, and I did not want to have that conversation. Ellen was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I just want to ask you one thing. Have you ever met anyone in her life, her family, a friend, a coworker, anyone who knows her?" I had not. In 3 months of being in Manila, in 2 months of daily contact before that, I had never been introduced to a single person in Zara's actual life. She had reasons for each instance. Family was complicated. Her mother was unwell and did not travel. Her friends were busy. Her workplace relationships were professional, and she kept her personal life separate. All of those reasons were plausible. Together they added up to a wall I had never tried to climb, because I had never thought to question why it was there. "I'm meeting her friends next week," I told Ellen. She mentioned a dinner. The dinner happened. 2 women from what Zara described as her social circle, one named Patricia, one who went by Len. They were pleasant. Conversation was light. Nobody said anything that sounded false. But afterward, thinking about it quietly in my apartment, I realized I had learned nothing concrete about either of them. No last names, no specific details about where they worked or how they had met Zara. Just pleasantness arranged and smooth like a set piece. I told myself I was being paranoid. September is when things accelerated in a way I could no longer pace into manageability. The condo opportunity appeared mid-month. Zara had been watching a development in the Pasig area. Pre-selling, she explained, which meant significant discount on unit price. She had been thinking about it for a long time. The deadline for pre-selling was end of month. She had done the numbers. It would be a solid investment. Manila real estate, she said, had been appreciating consistently. She showed me articles. She showed me the development's website. She needed $212,000. That number sat in the air between us for a long moment. I want to tell you that I said no. I want to tell you that I stood up and walked out and called Ellen and got on a plane, but I did not do any of those things. I sat across from her in a restaurant in BGC, and I asked her to walk me through the numbers again. She did calmly, thoroughly. Is this an investment for us? I asked. She looked at me with something in her expression that I read as sincerity. I think about us being here together, she said. Yes, I think of it that way. I went back to my apartment and I thought about it for 4 days. I called Theo in Seattle. I told him about the condo opportunity in the most neutral terms I could manage. An investment, a good market, a reputable developer. He asked me a few questions. He said it sounded plausible, but that he would want to verify the developer independently before moving anything. He said, just do your due diligence, Oz. You know how to research things. I did some research. Not enough. The developer was real. I confirmed that. The development existed. I found it on a property listing site. What I did not do was have a Philippine real estate lawyer review the documents she brought me, or independently verify that her name would actually be on the title, or ask why she needed my money and not a bank loan for a purchase she was supposedly making in her own name. I transferred the money on October 3rd, the confirmation on my laptop screen. Room temperature water, 11:47 at night. By the end of October, the running total had crossed $500,000. I did not add it up until late November, when I finally opened a spreadsheet and put every transfer in chronological order. The number that appeared at the bottom of the column was $510,000, spread across 8 months, across 11 separate transfers, each one with its own story, its own reason, its own careful framing. $510,000, my number, my date, my plan gone. The unraveling came from a direction I did not expect, which is perhaps how unravelings always come. I had a neighbor in the Makati building, a Canadian man named Frank, 55 years old, retired early from oil and gas in Alberta. He had been in Manila for 2 years. We had become friendly in the easy way that expats become friendly, sharing coffee on the building's common terrace, comparing notes about the city. He was not a close friend, but he was a familiar presence, and he knew the Philippines far better than I did. One afternoon in late October, Frank sat down next to me on the terrace and said, without particular ceremony, "Is your girlfriend's name Zara Santos?" I looked at him. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He looked uncomfortable. Then he said, "I think you need to talk to a man named Paul who lives on the 4th floor. He has been here 3 years. He knows something that I think you should hear directly from him." Paul was a British man, early 60s, quiet, the kind of person who has clearly processed something difficult and come out the other side with a permanent stillness. He invited me into his apartment the next morning, and he made coffee and he told me what he knew. He had met a woman named Zara Santos 18 months ago. She had been a manager at a logistics company in BGC. She had been direct and confident and independent seeming. He had become involved with her over a period of about 5 months. During that time he had transferred, in total, slightly over 90,000 British pounds to various accounts she had provided for various reasons. When it ended, when she stopped returning his calls with any consistency, and then stopped returning them at all, he had tried to find legal recourse and had been told by 2 different Philippine attorneys that his options were extremely limited given that all transfers had been made willingly and that the relationship had been consensual. He had not gone to the police. He had not told anyone except Frank, who was his closest friend in the building, and who had recognized the description when I had mentioned Zara's name in passing weeks earlier. Paul sat across from me and said in a very level voice, "I am telling you this because I wish someone had told me, not to upset you, but because you deserve to know what you are in." I sat in his apartment for about an hour. I did not say much. I asked a few questions, specific ones, about dates and amounts and how the end had come. He answered them all. When I left, I took the stairs back to my floor and I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the wall for a long time. I did not call Zara that night. I did not send a message. I sat with what I now knew, and I tried to figure out how to hold it alongside everything I had felt for 8 months. It did not fit. None of it fit into a shape that made sense. But the numbers fit. The transfers fit. The condo that was now in her name fit. The missing laptop I had replaced fit. Her mother's medications fit. Her cousin's rent fit. All of it, arranged in the new light of what Paul had told me, fit perfectly. I called Ellen. I told her everything, the real number, all of it. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say anything for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Oz, I need you to promise me something. I need you to not do anything impulsive. I need you to be safe, and I need you to call me again tomorrow morning." "I'm fine," I said. "I'm not going to do anything. I just needed to tell someone." "I know," she said. "I'm glad you told me." I met Zara the following afternoon. I had asked her to meet me at a coffee place near the apartment. Neutral, public. She arrived looking the way she always looked, put together, unhurried. She sat across from me and ordered, and smiled at the server, and then looked at me with an expression that shifted slightly when she read whatever was on my face. "You seem quiet today," she said. "I met Paul yesterday," I said, a pause, very brief. "Then who is Paul?" "Fourth floor of my building," I said, British. "He knows you." She looked at me with something that was almost impressive in its control. "I don't think I know anyone on the fourth floor of your building." "He knows you," I said. "He has bank transfer records with your account numbers. Some of them are the same account numbers you gave me." She was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then her expression changed, not to guilt, not to panic, to a kind of measured coldness that I had never seen on her face before, and that answered every question I still had. "You have been talking to people about me," she said, without asking me. "Zara," I said, "I want to give you the chance to explain this. There is nothing to explain. I am not responsible for what some man who does not know me is saying." "The account numbers match," I said. I checked. She picked up her coffee. She took a slow sip. Then she put it down and said, "What do you want from me, Oz? What is it that you want right now?" That question, the way she asked it, as if I was the one who had done something that needed to be answered for, as if the inconvenience was mine. "I want to understand," I said. "I want to know if any of it was real." She looked at me for a moment, and then she said something that has stayed with me, that I have turned over many times in the months since. "Everything I gave you was real. What I needed from you was also real. Those two things can both be true." Then she picked up her bag, left enough cash on the table for her coffee, and walked out. I sat there for a while after she left. The coffee place was busy around me. People on laptops, a couple arguing softly over something on a phone screen, a server sweeping near the window. Normal life happening at full volume. I was sitting in the middle of it with $510,000 gone, and a woman's last words arranged in my head like a puzzle I could not solve. I thought about what she had said. I thought about it for days. In a strange way I understood it, or I understood the logic of it, even if I could not accept it. She had been warm with me. She had been attentive. There were mornings that were genuinely good, conversations that felt real, moments where what existed between us had texture and weight. She had not faked all of it. Some of it she had simply used, and I had let her use it. That was the part I had to sit with. I did not pursue legal action. I spoke to a Philippine attorney, a man my expat neighbor Frank recommended, a careful, experienced woman named Addie. Reyes, who had handled cases like mine before. She was honest with me. She said, "Mr. Pemberton, you transferred funds willingly across an extended period for stated purposes. Without documentary fraud, signed false contracts, forged documents, your case is extremely difficult to prosecute. You could pursue it, but the cost, the timeline, and the likelihood of recovery are not in your favor." I thanked her and went back to my apartment and opened my laptop and looked at my accounts for a long time. What remained, my 401k untouched. The Belltown apartment, which was still generating rental income. A small brokerage account I had not touched in years. Not nothing. Not the life I had planned, but not destitution. I was going to be okay. Not the 60-year-old freedom I had worked 30 years toward, but okay. That distinction took a long time to stop hurting. Ellen came to Manila in December. She just showed up, booked a ticket, and flew 14 hours without making a big announcement about it, because that is the kind of sister she is. She arrived at my apartment building with one suitcase and the practical manner of someone who has come to help a problem get solved, not to discuss feelings. We went through my finances together over 2 days. Her with a notepad, me with the laptop. She had a friend in Portland who was a financial planner and who had agreed to consult remotely. By the end of the second day, we had a picture of what I actually had and what was realistically possible. She said, "You are not ruined. You have to understand that. You are not ruined." "I know," I said. "Do you believe that?" I thought about it honestly. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." She stayed for 10 days. We did some of the things I had originally planned to do with my retirement. One-day trip to Tagaytay, a morning at Intramuros, a long evening boat ride along Manila Bay watching the sunset while eating street food that cost almost nothing. She took photographs on her phone and I did not, because I am not really a photograph person. But I remember all of it. On her last night, she said, "You are going to have to restart, not from zero, but from a different place than you planned, and that is going to be hard, and it is also going to be okay." "I know," I said again. "The plan was always the plan," she said. "It was not the point. You know that." I did know it, in the way you know something before you have fully felt it. I stayed in Manila through the end of the year. Not for Zara, she had gone completely silent, no calls, no messages, nothing. I stayed because leaving felt like running, and I did not want to run. I wanted to finish grieving the thing I had lost in the place where I had lost it. There is a kind of closure you can only get from sitting in the geography of your mistake, until you stop needing to explain it. My 60th birthday came and went without ceremony. Ellen called in the morning. Theo sent a message from Seattle. Frank from the 4th floor knocked on my door with a small cake from the bakery downstairs and 2 forks, and we ate it at my kitchen table and talked about hockey, which neither of us follows closely. And it was one of the better birthdays I can remember. Not the birthday I had planned, not the retirement party, not the number, not the freedom. Just a cake and a neighbor and a morning with enough light in it. I went back to Seattle in February, 13 months after I had first arrived in Manila. I reclaimed my apartment, which felt smaller than I remembered, and I started figuring out what came next. I had to do some consulting work, not much, but some. Theo connected me with a few former colleagues who needed advisory support on infrastructure transitions. It was not the retirement I had planned, but it was not the end of anything either. I started talking to a therapist in March, a man named Dr. Emilio Vega, who specialized in what he called attachment and financial trauma, a niche that I had not known existed and that turned out to be exactly what I needed. He asked me in our second session what I thought I had been looking for in Manila, underneath everything. Not the retirement logistics, the actual thing. I thought about it for longer than the pause probably warranted. Then I said, I think I wanted proof that I had not used up all the good things, that there was still something ahead of me that was not just maintenance. He nodded slowly and said, "That is one of the most honest answers I have heard to that question." What Zara took from me was not just money. The money was concrete, and the number was specific, and those facts mattered. But what she took alongside the money was the plan, the proof I had thought that I had earned something, that 31 years of careful building pointed somewhere meaningful. When the plan was gone, I had to figure out what the building had been for, without the plan to give it meaning. That turned out to be the harder work. Harder than the account balances, harder than the legal conversations, harder than explaining to people I respected what had happened. I do not hate Zara. I have worked on that statement enough to believe it is true, rather than just something I say. I think she was a person who had learned to survive using skills that are devastatingly effective on men like me. Men who come in with money and loneliness and enough self-awareness to believe they are too smart to be fooled. That self-awareness, it turns out, is part of the vulnerability, because it makes you argue yourself out of suspicion. It makes you name your own paranoia before anyone else has to. I think about the things she said that were true. She said I was kind. She said I made her feel like her ambitions were worth something. She said she liked how I listened. I think those things were real. I think she meant them. I also think she took $212,000 for a condo that I will never see, and that is registered in her name alone. Both things are true. I have made my peace with both things being true. What I could not have told you a year ago but can tell you now is that I am still here. Not diminished, changed, and not entirely in the wrong direction. I am more careful. I am more honest with myself about what I want and why I want it. I am working again, part-time, which I had sworn I was done with, and which I find I do not hate as much as I expected. I walk more than I used to. I cook more than I used to. I call Ellen every Sunday. The retirement dream, the specific version of it, the number, the date, the complete freedom, that is gone. I am not going to pretend it is not gone. $510,000 is not a number that gets poetic closure. It is a number that sits in a column in a spreadsheet and does not change. I will work until I am 63, maybe 64. The freedom will come later and in a smaller package. But I want to say something to whoever is watching this and recognizing themselves in it. Whether you are in the middle of something right now, making excuses for numbers that are adding up in the wrong direction, or whether you are sitting on the other side of something you are not ready to name out loud yet, the plan was never the thing. The plan was just the shape you put around the hope. And the hope, the actual hope, the part of you that was trying to believe in something good, that is not gone. It cannot be transferred out of your account. It cannot be put in someone else's name. I know that sounds like something they put on a motivational poster. I am a 59-year-old software executive who just lost his retirement savings to a woman in Manila who is probably already managing someone else's hope. I know how it sounds, but I am still here, and that still means something. More maybe than it did before.